Good evening, gentlemen. I would like to thank you all for your attendance. As I am sure you're all aware, we meet once again to discuss the impending changes to be made by the Rugby Football Union and the Rugby Football Union's rejection of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Rugby Football Union of senior clubs. Aye. Clearly, gentlemen, we are not being taken seriously by the Rugby Football Union. We need to protect our collective interests.
And the interest of our players.
Aye, let's have a fair payment for lad when he's playing football instead of working. And let's have it above board.
We can't have the threat of suspension hanging over our heads just for the sake of broken time payments.
Sorry, we'll all be suspended.
We are all aware that the Rugby Football Union proposes to expel anyone found paying broken time. Gentlemen, I am not proposing we condone professionalism. I am proposing payment for bona fide broken time. Let's treat our players fairly.
Aye, it's all right for them that can afford to live without wages, but our players can't afford to lose any money. We cannot support a game for the classes and not the masses.
Especially since our players have shown their superiority on the field.
Not only that, gentlemen, we need nationwide cup and league competitions. We need some sort of organisation. We need to make a stand, gentlemen. I think the time has come for us to form our own union. A Northern Rugby Football Union. Do I have your support?
I second.
Let's see a show of hands. All those in favour? Aye. And against? Mr. Platt, let the record show that the clubs here represented have decided to form a Northern Rugby Football Union and pledge themselves to push forward without delay its establishment on the principle of payment for bona fide broken time only.
And so the new game, the Northern Rugby Football Union, was written into sporting annals. A breakaway had taken place and a new game had come into being, simply because some clubs wanted to pay their players the money they lost whilst playing rugby. Miners, mill hands, factory workers, who earned just 25 shillings a day. That seemed to be the reason. In reality, there were many others. The northern clubs like Huddersfield, Holbeck and Manningham were working hard to establish formal competitions, but they were met with opposition all the way from the Rugby Football Union. The strength of the northern clubs and the success was a bitter pill for southern clubs to swallow. The game for the classes was being perfected by the masses, and the classes didn't like it. As if that wasn't enough, the game was being admired by the masses as well. Competitions like the Yorkshire Cup were causing a lot of excitement and making it even more difficult for the RFU to stop the rot of northern strength and popularity in their precious and pure amateur game. The games, teams and players may have been slow in comparison to today, but they thrilled the men, women and children of northern communities, like those in downtown Bradford, Halifax, Wigan and Leigh. Popularity increased, crowds increased, revenue increased, and players started to move from club to club with the incentive of money. The RFU decided that enough was enough and legislated that players must justify any move to another club and banned professionalism in 1886. Inquiries, witch hunts, allegations, suspensions created more tension, and both sides retreated to their own camps. Eventually, the months of argument came to a head, and on Thursday, the 29th of August, 1895, the Northern Rugby Football Union was formed by 22 teams rooted in working-class towns where rugby was their saviour from drudgery of everyday life. The Northern Rugby Football Union may have been born out of restlessness and dubbed the poor man's game, but its wayward leaders were going to have their day. The Northern Union had fixtures arranged just 9 days after the breakaway meeting on the 7th of September 1895, and had already decided that all clubs would play each other twice, once at home and again on foreign soil. The first 10 years of the Northern Union were years of change, expansion and glory, ending in a game not dissimilar to that of today. The league structure was a problem, though. The league couldn't decide on a format and seemed to dither from one design to another. In the chaotic single division of 1905-06, clubs were free to organise their own fixtures, and the championship was decided on percentages. The league was in turmoil, and most clubs had some grievance or other, but through the pandemonium, the next season brought the system that was going to last. The forerunner to the modern Premiership. The familiar playoff system, where first played fourth and second played third. Halifax, Oldham, Runcorn and Keighley were the first challengers, but it was Halifax that took the honours after outwitting Oldham 18 points to 3 in the final at Fartown. The Northern Union had finally broken away over professionalism. The Rugby Football Union had got rid of it. But the Northern Union were faced with all the problems, disputes, arguments, strikes. They addressed them by making professionalism legal. Northern Union football was gripping the nation, at least the north of the nation, and players, teams and supporters were increasing at a rate of knots. The boom was at the Rugby Football Union's expense.
There has again been a fairly large exodus of clubs to join the Northern Union. The last batch which went treated us to some disgraceful revelations. In bidding farewell to the Rugby Union, a certain club actually made a boast that for years they had cooked the accounts. Such an avowal, which was wholly unsolicited, is, I believe, without precedent in the annals of sport. Though we are fewer in numbers than we were, I think we can congratulate ourselves that we are in a very much healthier condition, and that in purifying our ranks, we have now the assistance of the Northern Union, who have proved themselves to be a most admirable drainage pipe. A man who would cook accounts would steal your watch, and is capable of any kind of iniquity, and we are well rid of such disreputable persons.
But while the RFU were busy smarting on the exodus of their disreputable teams, those unprincipled folk of the North were busy planning a new competition, one which would be open to all Northern Union clubs. It would operate on the merciless, heart-stopping, nerve-tingling basis of sudden death knockout competition. The first-round encounters were witnessed round and about the north of England on the 5th of March 1896, and by the following year, thousands of loyal Batley and St Helens supporters assembled at Headingley to watch the final. Neither of the two sides would have been backed as favourites in the competition, but as the two teams settled in for the pre-match photo, the gallant youths of Batley looked the image of professionalism and every inch the champions over the ungainly St Helens side, who were rigged out in every jersey under the sun. Looks can be deceiving, though, and the Saints side gave Batley a good game, coming back in the second half in what promised to be a revival. But in the end, Batley outran the St Helens defence and became the first team to lift the Challenge Cup trophy. In 1901, Batley made the final for a third time in 5 years. On the 29th of April at Headingley, 29,563 people watched as once again Batley's Watty Davis put the first points on the scoreboard. Today's safety officials might have something to say about the position that these spectators chose to see Batley's scrum half in action. Warrington didn't put any points on the board, but their gifted winger Jack Fish enchanted the crowd as he ran the game to the death. Fish made it back to another two finals, and in 1905 and 1907 he was able to taste the great glory of lifting the Challenge Cup trophy. While Batley and Warrington were making regular appearances in Challenge Cup finals, a couple of other clubs were writing themselves into the history of the Rugby League as well. The 1901-02 Broughton Rangers team, captained by Bob Wilson, followed Batley to the Challenge Cup final podium to become the first club to take the league and the cup double. By introducing the Lancashire and Yorkshire Cups in 1905 and 6 and the County Championships in 1907, the Northern Union presented their clubs with the ultimate challenge, the winning of all 4 cups. Only 1 year later, and as soon as it was physically possible, Albert Goldthorpe's Hunslet side took the Northern Union world by storm by achieving the near impossible and winning every single cup. At 37 and coming to the end of his career, Albert Goldthorpe was the perfect injection of experience needed for any winning side. Billy Batten, at the other end of the scale, was 18 and could match every ounce of his enthusiasm with an ounce of skill and talent. By the time Britain declared itself at war with Germany, the game was 19 years old and pretty well formed, instantly recognisable as being different to its ancestor, rugby union. 3 clubs proved to be masters of the new game, and spectators held their breath whenever or wherever they played. In Lancashire, the might of Oldham and Wigan outclassed any other side. Both teams appeared in 5 consecutive championship finals. Oldham were also twice winners of the Lancashire League, 3 times winner of the Lancashire Cup, and twice runners-up in the Challenge Cup. Wigan, who had the edge of the 2 Lancashire clubs, were 6 times Lancashire League Championship winners, 3 times Lancashire Cup winners, and once runners-up in the Challenge Cup. It was a club from the other side of the Pennines, though, who were streets ahead of the 2 Lancashire masters and reached the pinnacle of Northern Union achievement. The team of all talents was definitely a fitting title for a team made up of 13 outstanding players. Players like Stanley Morehouse, a local lad who played in a deliciously enviable position on the wing of the great Harold Wagstaff. Albert Rosenfeld, who played on the opposite wing, had been poached by Huddersfield from the 1908 Kangaroo touring team. Edgar Ridley, the youngest All-Black in history. Johnny Rogers, a small and evasive halfback. And Test star Fred Longstaff, plus a host of others. Each one was brilliant in their own right, and combined as a team under the leadership of the awe-inspiring Harold Wagstaff, they were unbeatable. And in 1914-15, on the edge of war, they became just the second team to take all 4 cups. Besides talent, skill, and an incredible list of honours, all 3 clubs had one thing in common. They all had players drafted in from every possible area of the rugby league world. Northern football had spread incredibly in its 20 years, and early administrators sought to establish international games to compensate for their players' loss of international honours. In 1904, though, the Northern Union made plans to rectify the situation, and a match between England and the other nationalities was staged as a kind of showpiece to promote international rugby. But the Northern Union was crying out for true international competition, and their voice was heard by a young New Zealander working for the post office in Wellington, Albert Henry Baskerville. They inspired him to join up with George Smith and bring a New Zealand touring team to Europe to play under Northern Union rules. Not the All Blacks, but the All Golds, the name given to them by the New Zealand press because of their association with professionalism, played 3 rugby union games at Sydney on the way over, and sold their idea to the star of Aussie Rugby Union, Dally Messenger, who joined them as they left for England. The first proper international was played on the 1st of January 1908 against Wales at Aberdare. Between 50 and 20,000 people came to watch, and although they were unlucky, losing the first test, they won the second and won the third. It didn't take long for others to follow. In 1908, an Australian New South Wales Rugby League of 8 clubs was founded. Shortly after, they embarked on a tour of Great Britain, captained by Dinny Lutcher. Their vice-captain, Dally Messenger, was fast becoming a seasoned tourist and was in England on his second tour that year. The professional Australian touring team, predictably dubbed the Kangaroos, must have had high hopes when they drew 22 all in the first test, but they went down in the second and the third. When they got back to Australia, Northern Union took off fast, and the Aussies were back on British soil representing their country again in 1911-12. The relative novices caused a big to-do and gave England a sign of things to come, because they won 28 of their 35 matches and almost made a clean sweep in the tests to carry home the Ashes. In 1910, the British Northern Union Stars got their first chance to tour when they accepted the Australian and New Zealand invite to play their game in Australasia, but only on Northern Union terms, a large percentage of the profits on a sliding scale. The Lions won the first 2 tests in Australia and the only test in New Zealand to bring the Ashes home. 4 years later, Harold Wagstaff led the second tour to Australia and New Zealand. The Test series was all square by the third when he led his team into battle. And though 3 of the Lions' key players, Frank Williams, Douglas Clark and Billy Hall, were taken from the field, the remaining heroic 10 still won in what was to become known as the Rorke's Drift Test, and so claimed the series. The Northern Union's persistence to expand their game and scandals in rugby union clubs over illegal payments gave them the ideal opportunity to expand their game. Disgraced rugby union teams in Wales supplied regular new recruits to the Northern Union ranks, and teams were formed in Merthyr Tydfil and Ebervale in 1907-08. Others came and went at different points. The Ebervale team seemed to be strong enough to last the distance, and they managed to reach the third round of the Challenge Cup in 1910. But by 1912, all the Welsh teams had petered out, and there was a temporary lull in Welsh activity. Expansion in the southern counties, where rugby union was a sacred game, was even harder. But in 1910, the formation of a team at Coventry made it seem that the Northern Union had made its first step southward. After 3 years, the club folded, and the league's southern expansion quest was temporarily laid to rest, because the First World War had started. At first, it was business as usual, but as the war gathered speed, the game was thrown into turmoil. All the 1914-15 season was played without problems, but by the 1915 annual general meeting, the war had hit the country hard.
Gentlemen, the war has thrown the game into turmoil. Some kind of action must be taken. It has been decided that except for schoolboys and intermediates under the age of 18, competitive football under Northern Union rules should be suspended for the duration of the war.
The newspaper's unofficial league tables documented Dewsbury, Barrow, Leeds and Hull as the war year's most successful sides. But while Dewsbury were enjoying relative success, coming top of the merit tables for 2 years, other clubs were really experiencing the hardships of war. Clubs like Broughton Rangers, Oldham and Wigan just managed to hang on by selling their stands and letting their pitches out for grazing. But the less fortunate ones like York, Wakefield and Huddersfield had to be content with a period of rest until the news of peace was on everyone's lips. The war did bring a temporary halt to one long-standing bitter battle, and Northern Union players were given the chance to play rugby union for the first time. On April the 18th, 1916, 10,000 spectators came to Headingley to watch the North of England military play the Anzacs and make sporting history when the North, including some of the Northern Union's finest, beat the Anzacs 13 points to 11. The Northern Union wasted no time, because by January 1919, proper Lancashire and Yorkshire leagues had been reformed, and by the 22nd of January, professionalism had returned. In the Cup, Huddersfield were back on the trophy trail. They'd only just reformed in time, but were still strong enough to take the honours, and so it went on. By the time they met Hull in the Championship final, they'd already collected the Yorkshire Cup, the Yorkshire League Championship and the Challenge Cup, and looked set to take all 4 cups for the second time. 5 Huddersfield players were on tour with the Lions, but they were still 2 up in the closing minutes when Hull's mighty centre Billy Batten scored the clinching try and made his team 3-2 winners. At the end of the 1920-21 season, Lee, in 20th position in the league, shocked a 25,000-strong crowd when they beat favourites Halifax 13 points to 0 in the Challenge Cup final. Huddersfield dropped to an unbelievable 14th place in the league, and Leeds paid a fantastic £1,000 transfer to lure the talented winger Harold Buck away from Hunslet. In 1922, the title of the Northern Rugby Football Union was dropped, and the last traces of the game's association with Twickenham were gone. From then on, the game became known as the Rugby League. 7 years later, the most far-reaching change of the decade was made, and the Rugby League legend was created. The Challenge Cup was quickly growing into a Rugby League phenomenon. The northern stadia were struggling to accommodate the 30,000 gates, and the Take the Game to London lobby were making their voices heard, louder than ever. The chaos of the 1924 final between Oldham and Wigan at Rochdale, when spectators spilled onto the pitch and players had to run through them to score tries, brought matters to a head. By the time the 1929 final came around, a decision had been made. The Challenge Cup final was coming to Wembley. The first 2 teams to go with it were Dewsbury, a side made up mainly of raw Yorkshire talent, and a Wigan team bulging with crack RU and RL players drawn from far and wide. Legend has it that, in trying to create a spectacle for the watching world, the Rugby League dictated to both teams that they must play open and creative rugby. No problem to the skilled ball handlers of Wigan, but for Dewsbury's straight down the middle, forward-dominated side, it was like playing a different game. Wigan took early control and never lost it. Jim Sullivan, the Wigan folk hero, scored the first ever Wembley points with a penalty goal, and Sid Abram, the Wigan standoff, ran a historic 40 yards to score the first ever Wembley Challenge Cup final try. Jack Davis, the Dewsbury fullback, gave his team their only points. Tries from Lou Brown and Roy Kinnear smashed any hopes that Dewsbury might have had of winning, and wrote Jim Sullivan into the history books as the first ever Rugby League captain to hold the Challenge Cup aloft in Wembley Stadium. In their 1929 Wembley win, Wigan had put the finishing touches to their 1920s success story. The key to Wigan's success seemed to be their ability to attract players from all over the place. Welsh Rugby Union stars like the ace fullback Jim Sullivan, kicker of 2,867 goals in his career, and other outstanding overseas players. Wigan may have been the glamour club of the 1920s, but in the achievement stakes, another club was way out in front of them. They possessed 2 of the most exciting qualities a rugby league team could hope for: a strong, intimidating pack and a skillful, experience-driven backline. The mighty Swinton seemed to sweep all that lay before them. The Lancashire League 3 times, the Lancashire Cup twice, the League Championship twice, and the Challenge Cup twice. In 1927-28, they eclipsed their contemporaries when they became the final team to do the near impossible and win all 4 cups. There must have been something in the Manchester air, because the end of Swinton's glory years marked the beginning of their closest neighbours and greatest rivals. The team, dubbed Les Diables Rouges by an excited French population when they watched their awe-inspiring play, Salford were one of the first teams to make a visit to France, and the awaiting crowds hadn't seen anything like it. The immortal Salford side gave their hosts a spectacular display of strength at the front and speed in the back, in the same way as they did here against Barrow in 1938. The French may have named them the Devils, but Salford were the Angels of Rugby League, and it was only the Second World War that put a stop to their collection of punts. 5 Lancashire Leagues, 4 Lancashire Cups, 3 Championships and 1 Challenge Cup, won partly under the captaincy of the magnificent Gus Risman. When the horrible reality of war hit the country in 1914, the Northern Union shelved its plans for further expansion to concentrate on a more important issue, survival. And when the war came to a close, revival. By the 1920s, the game overseas was going strong again. And within 2 years of the end of the war, Australasia was hosting a Lions tour led by Harold Wagstaff. The Aussies had regained strength quickly and secured the Ashes in the first 2 series. The 1924 and 1928 tours to Australia were more successful, and both times John T. Parkin led the Lions to victory. On the home front, the game seemed to stall, and before the 1928-29 season, only 5 new teams had joined the league, and they were Featherstone, Wigan Highfield, Castleford, Pontypridd and Carlisle. It was this desire to succeed at club level that ensured that the good word was spread. Increased financial incentives from ambitious clubs meant that 40 rugby union internationals changed codes, including some fantastic players like Johnny Ring, Mel Rosser and droves of other less famous players who followed their lead. In 1928, the Games administration stepped in and took over when they moved the Challenge Cup to Wembley, gave the world a rugby league showpiece and moved their expansion up a gear or 2. The 1929 final intrigued the watching public, particularly in the south, and a floodlit match at the White City brought in enough crowd to persuade its directors to put in a bid for the ailing Wigan Highfield. Permission was granted in 1933 and a rugby league club was established in London, a dream come true for those dedicated expansionists from the industrial north. Games were played on a Wednesday night and some players had to make the long journey from the north to London. But even with these difficulties, London Highfield achieved 14th in a league of 28, but they couldn't draw the crowds and the London dream faded. It was only out of focus for a short while because in 1935-36 teams in Acton, Willesden and Streatham and Mitcham were in competition, but they were soon gone. A club in Newcastle also managed 2 seasons, but again quickly folded. Overseas in Australia, the game had really taken off, and in the 1930s, rugby league had made rugby union into the poor cousin of the 2 sports as far as popularity was concerned.
Having shown Movietone that they can perform a haka, the Australian Rugby League footballers start on their journey to show England that they can play football.
The Australians were regular tourists and hosts of the Ashes series, but the game's strength at home wasn't reflected in the national side's performance on the field of international competition. 5 Ashes series were contested in the decade before the Second World War, 3 played on English soil and 2 on Australian. Britain won the lot. The first in 1929-30 in Great Britain was one of the most controversial on record. 1 test all by the 3rd and the teams were set for a competitive match. The Kangaroos seemed to have the upper hand for the whole of the game, but it was still 0-0 in the dying minutes when the Australian scum half whoosh went over in the corner. A last-ditch tackle by British loose forward Fred Butters took down the corner flag and the try was disallowed. The Australians were devastated and called for a 4th test, and for the first time a 4th test took place. Stan Smith scored the winning try and stole the Ashes from under the Aussie noses. In 1936 the Lions were seasoned travellers and took every inch of the long sea crossing in their stride. It wasn't all rest and relaxation, though. The boys still had to keep up their training and prepare their finely tuned British muscles to face their hefty Antipodean opponents. Some of the lads were on their second tour in 4 years and by now were familiar with the sights and sounds down under, including some of the more unusual local customs. In New Zealand, they seemed to get the hang of the haka, in theory anyway, but nobody was persuading them to join in with this lifeguard demonstration on Bondi Beach. Training on board ship might have been unconventional, but it seemed to work. The Lions only lost 3 games out of the 25 they played in Australia, steamed through New Zealand undefeated, and victoriously carried the Ashes back on the long journey home to England. The biggest overseas achievement of the 1930s took place in a different country. France had been excluded from the Rugby Union 5 Nations Championship for being professional and over-rough, which made them right for rugby league. An exhibition match was arranged in 1933 between Australia and England. Australia managed to win, but the French public was so inspired by the game that a tour of England followed by the establishment of a club championship. By 1938, they were taking part in test matches against Australia, and in 1938-39, they had beaten both England and Wales to take the European Championship. While the good name of rugby league was being spread overseas, the rules were constantly changing, and in 1935, the headquarters was moved to Chapeltown Road. The constant changes didn't seem to affect the game's popularity. It was still booming, with 50 and 60,000 strong crowds at the major games in 1938 and 1939. When the Kiwi touring team set foot on British soil in August 1939, hard times were just around the corner.
Following the announcement of Germany's invasion of Poland, New Zealand have now played the last game of their shortened tour and are on their way home. Let's hope we'll see them again soon.
At the beginning of the war, an emergency committee was set up to oversee the game. As the war got going, pitches were called up for military service as drill grounds or for storage. Crowds were restricted in case of air raid, and games were played on a Lancashire-Yorkshire basis, with the winners of each division playing off for the championship. The league managed to keep the championship going till 1940-41. At that point, the Lancashire Cup was closed, and Wigan and Oldham, God help us, played in the Yorkshire Cup. As far as the emergency leagues were concerned, the heroes were Dewsbury, again apparently revelling in wartime conditions under the pioneering hand of Eddie Waring. Tours obviously had to be shelved in wartime, but international marriages carried on after a fashion and under Union rules. England and Wales met in services matches, and once again rugby league players were deemed fit to take part.
Northern Union players may play alongside rugby union players only in bona fide naval and military teams. Munition workers cannot be regarded as naval and military players. These rulings only apply during the war.
The likes of Gus Risman and Trevor Foster regularly took their place in a Welsh rugby union side. For all the die-hard rugby league supporters, the greatest confrontations of the war were staged far away from the battlefields of Europe, on 2 rugby league grounds in the north of England. When rugby union met rugby league in 2 no-holds-barred encounters, the age-old rivalry between the 2 codes was to be settled once and for all, not by the game's officials and administrators, but by the players themselves on their own field of conflict. The first was at Headingley in 1943, and rugby league, playing under rugby union rules, triumphed 18 points to 11. The second was played in the dramatic surroundings of Odsal Stadium. The rugby union team prepared to prove that the first game had been a fluke. The rugby league players prepared to prove it hadn't been. With everyone's pride at stake, the tension couldn't have been greater, and the bands, pre-match parades and bagpipes were all in place to give the game a 1940s glitz and glamour equivalent to modern-day internationals. Neither team wanted to concede, and when the final whistle blew, the Rugby League Services' 15 points put them just 5 points in front. Proved their point, but the rift between the 2 codes were far from healed. And when the rugby union withdrew their permission for their players to join with league players in peacetime, nothing really had changed. The war had had a suffocating effect on rugby league. Some clubs had sold their grounds, and players and supporters were suffering from flagging morale. But the revival was on its way. A 15-year period of star players, thrilling games and record-breaking crowds, a period of growth, prosperity and glorious rugby league which threw up a great number of superlative players, a whole catalogue of vintage names. Spellbinding talents like Ernest Ward, Eric Batten, Willie Horn, Lewis Jones and Vince Cornelius. Young prodigies like Billy Boston and Mick Sullivan made their rugby league debuts, and established maestros like Gus Risman and Trevor Foster saw the end of their careers. The 1945-52 Wigan team added to the glittering roll call. They combined all the essential elements of a great rugby league team and were challenged only by Brian Bevan's mighty Wellington.
I remember the first time I come up to Wigan to watch a game. I come up to watch a game and it was Warrington and Wigan at Warrington. And this fella run out, bald, droopy shoulders, no teeth, big pads on his knees. And I said, who the hell is that like? That's the great Brian Bevan. He was, at that particular time, he was marking Brian Ogren. But as soon as he got the ball, he was gone like a whippet. I've never seen anything as good in my life. Well, I had a knack of taking the centre, moving on to the other centre, and then moving on to the wingman. So when the ball was moving towards Brian Bevan, I said, he's mine. I shot across. I just in time to turn around and watch him beat the fullback. He'd gone, and you know, he was tremendous. His acceleration was absolutely tremendous. His defence wasn't that good, but towards the end of the game, after about 10 minutes towards the end of the game, he tackled me once, and all the crowd cheered, and he went round. He was good. He was doing that, but he was very fragile sort of a player, you know. I remember one time we played and I come across the wing, from my wing, to tackle him in the corner. Just round the waist and slid down, and he scored up. So I tapped him on the back and said, "Good lad, Brian," but no movement, so turned him over and his eyes was going like, you know, he was so fragile, you know. You never put a hand on him normally. Brian Bevan, attacking, tremendous.
On their home territory, Wigan were unstoppable, whatever the weather. Away, they were still fearful opponents, even after long journeys on inadequate roads to matches like this one against Barrow. The fans were as invincible as the team. The game was disappointing for them, though, because the might of Furness triumphed to take the close-run contest to an 8-7 victory. The whole of the game was experiencing a boom in supporters, but it was the next decade that gave Rugby League its finest turnout of spectators in its history, when the new tower of Rugby League virtue, Warrington, met Halifax in the 1954 Challenge Cup final replay at Odsal Stadium. The first edition of the final had all the pomp and ceremony of a Wembley final, but as far as rugby goes, it was uninspiring. And it was sinking feelings all round for fans and players when the contest ended in a 4-4 draw. The replay was the first since 1910, and this was truly a spectacular affair. Different eyewitnesses all have different experiences. Some could see everything, some could see nothing, some could see a bit, but most feel sure that there were a lot more spectators than the 102,569 recorded. The players had to push down through the fans, drawn from all over Lancashire and Yorkshire into the Odsal Bowl, and were faced by a breathtaking blanket of heads. It was the biggest post-war football crowd of any code seen since the war, a record which still stands. The terraces were made from pressed down ashes and railway sleepers, which some eager fans have dug up and piled on top of each other to give them a better view, to see Challoner score the first try of the match. It's a miracle there wasn't a major disaster, especially since the fans moved around looking for a better position, regardless of the number of people in the stadium. In the second half, Halifax seemed to be applying pressure, but they had to settle for 4 points from 2 Griffiths penalty goals. Soon after, Jerry Helm went over in the corner to take the Challenge Cup trophy for the second time in 4 years. Oh, how we rejoiced. In a matter of only 3 days, the two captains were facing each other again over the toss of a coin in the championship final. The powerful Warrington side were victorious again. The Warrington folk eagerly lined the streets for the return of the Primrose and Blue heroes, led by the one and only Brian Bevan. The real crowd boom was coming to the end by now, and the blame was being laid on TV's door. Successful clubs like Huddersfield and St Helens fans still turned out in incredible numbers to watch the two mighty clubs. Bradford, Northern and Leigh achieved a passing boom in crowd figures when they became the first clubs to shed light on their grounds. The first game under these floodlights at Bradford in 1951 generated enough interest to bring 29,072 people to Odsal Stadium, and a floodlit Lancashire-Yorkshire clash was witnessed by 12,870 at Hilton Park. None of the other clubs seemed impressed though, and there were no other takers for floodlit football. In 1949, Bradford were making headlines again as the first club to make it to 3 consecutive Challenge Cup finals. Almost as soon as the war had ended, the Rugby League administration began to turn their eyes back to their expansion plans, and in 1945 a West Cumbrian outpost was established in Workington, closely followed by one in Whitehaven. A quick succession of new teams followed, and Rugby League seemed to be spreading at an amazing rate. But though Rugby League found it consistently difficult to establish the game in rugby union areas, some newly established clubs did survive, and others went even further. Workington Town had unbelievable success in its early years. It took only 7 years before they had won the Championship and the Challenge Cup, and by the time they had celebrated their 13th birthday, they had made 3 appearances at Wembley, directed by the still magnificent player Gus Risman. When they met Wigan here on the 22nd of September 1951, they had already had the better of the mighty club, and their second victory seemed to be the beginning of the end of the Lancashire club's domination and the start of a Cumbrian success story. Further down the coast, Barrow made 3 Wembleys in 6 years as well. In 1955, the 2 mighty northwestern clubs met in the final.
On the great day of the Rugby League Challenge Cup final, London streets were full of Barrow and Workington supporters. In fact, there was quite a little invasion of the big city. Many went to have a look at Buckingham Palace, always a big draw for visitors, and indeed for Londoners themselves. The Household Cavalry at Horse Guards Parade were another attraction. Trafalgar Square and the famous pigeons also welcomed the visitors from the northwest of England. But of course everybody's destination was Wembley, and to Wembley they now came in their thousands. Rivalry was naturally very keen, and no one left any doubt about which team he was backing to the cup. It was a fine day for a great event, and the holiday mood, coupled with mounting excitement, was everywhere in evidence. The choice of ends having been decided, Barrow kick off. If Barrow started slight favourites, that meant nothing to Workington, who went off in great style and certainly had the best of the opening exchanges. Their fans urged them on in no uncertain manner. The first big thrill came when Workington were awarded a penalty. That brilliant goal kicker Tony Paskins took it, and Workington led by 2-0. The Duke, accompanied by Lord Derby, must certainly have been enjoying every moment. Workington now kicked off in the second half, a half which was destined to produce one sensation after another. And presently another penalty came their way. Once again, Willie Horne made no mistake, and Barrow were 2 points up. Then, still more exciting for Barrow fans, the ball passed to Horne, who coolly drops a goal. Went away to score the first try of the match. Captain converted, and Workington were now 9 points behind. Barrow still forced the pace, and soon went over for their second try. Conversion by Horne followed, whereas Workington had by no means finished yet. Playing with great spirit right up to the end, they won the admiration of all at Wembley when they got another try through Effie Gibson. Paskins did the rest, and the score was 12-21. Well, that was the result of a great and sporting cup final. Victory, but by no means all the honours went to Barrow, hard luck Workington Town. Every spectator within reach wanted to touch the cup for luck.
Overseas, rugby league activity had got straight back into gear after the war. Tours were started again in 1946 when the Lions, captained by Gus Risman, set out for Australia and New Zealand on the HMS Indomitable. The aircraft carrier gave them a safe crossing to the Antipodes, but also their nickname. Indomitables was the perfect name for them because they went through the series without losing, drawing the first test in Sydney, winning the second in Brisbane and winning the third when they returned to Sydney. The one crack in their armour was penetrated by New Zealand, who won the only test at Carlisle Park. New Zealand came to Europe in 1947 to be met by huge crowds and a team called Great Britain for the first time, but they went home empty-handed. In 1950, Great Britain went to Australia with a record 8 Wigan players in the squad, and in the third test at Sydney gave Australia their first Ashes in 30 years. The 1954 tour gave the Lions a chance to show off their two most exciting newcomers, Billy Boston and Lewis Jones. Both made a big impression. Lewis Jones clocked up a record 278 points, made up of 127 goals and 8 tries. And Billy Boston, the fearsome winger, set a record, scoring an amazing 36 tries, and in New Zealand equalled the record by scoring 4 tries in the first test. In 1958, the Lions fought their most difficult battle since 1914. They had been trounced 25-8 in the first test, when Prescott led them in the second, a rerun of the Rorke's Drift test, and carried them through with a broken arm. Dave Bolton went off with a broken collarbone, and Cornelius, Challoner and Fraser all paid a visit to the hospital after the game. They still won, and their spirits never lowered again because they thrashed the Aussies in the third test to take the series. In 1959, the Kangaroos came to Britain, out to revenge the previous year's magnificent Lions victory. It seemed like they might just do it when they swept away Great Britain's first Test challenge and launched their own young prodigy, the awe-inspiring centre, Reg Gasnier. They didn't do it, but were incredibly unlucky in the second and third Tests because the scorelines for both were extremely close, and so they went down in history as the last Australian touring team to lose the Ashes on British soil. Within the shores of other countries, rugby league was going from strength to strength. By the time France met England at Wembley, enough short tours had gone back and forward for the French side to gather enough strength and speed to run out clear winners 12 points to 5. Close behind in 1950 came another international team, this time from Italy. They lost all their games, but the sport so prospered when they returned home that another team arrived in 1954. Despite a lot of support from the Rugby League, the Italians couldn't perform on the field, and they went home again without a win. At home, the Rugby League boom was over. Crowds were falling fast, and by the 1960s, the game's dwindling popularity was a serious worry for everybody. The drop in the crowds forced the game's custodians to have a long and purposeful look at their sport, and change one thing after another in search of a reason for its declining support. The main culprit in most people's eye was TV. By 1960, both BBC and ITV were televising matches, and people could sit in the comfort of their own homes to support their favourite side. There wasn't a lot the league could do about it, especially because it brought a precious source of revenue and publicity. People blamed the lack of interesting characters because of a ban on overseas players as well. Even though British clubs had players like Billy Boston, Vince Corellis, Alex Murphy and Neil Fox on their books, the speculation was enough for clubs to turn to signing players from South Africa and Fiji and even other sports. A long line of players came from South Africa, but the most magnificent and certainly the most lucrative overseas signing was made by St Helens, who just pipped Wigan to the post to import an ex-rugby union Springbok, a player with lightning pace, Tom van Vollenhoven. At 22 years of age, Van Vollenhoven was as strong as he was fast. His amazing talent tantalised every crowd he played in front of, and his incredible try-scoring ability made him one of the most devastating wingers ever to play the game.
Vollenhoven's going to score, and Vollenhoven scored another great try. And Vollenhoven will score. He'll score in the corner.
Crowds still fell, and it was only cup matches and major league fixtures that brought decent gates. The next to come under scrutiny was Saturday fixtures, and Sunday games were introduced to allow Saturday workers to go to the games and to avoid clashes with other sports. The move caused uproar, but once again Bradford and Lee defied the Puritans for a second time and played on a Sunday. And in 1977, Sunday was declared by the league to be the official match day. In the long term, there wasn't much change to numbers, and the officials were left still looking around for something to blame. Eventually, they decided there were too many league games. Bradford Northern's folding in 1963-64 was the last straw, and the ashen-faced league abandoned the two-division experiment a year early. In 1964-5, the game was back to one division, with a playoff of the top 16 teams instead of the old 4. In the 1970s, the game had reached an all-time low in terms of support, so when the Lancashire and Yorkshire League Championships were finished in 1970, the John Player Trophy was launched. In 1973-74, the Rugby Football League returned its attention to the league structure.
Well, in fact, if you look at the history of the Championship, I'm a great believer. I'm not a believer in playoffs. When you played all season, in 9 months of different conditions, different injury problems, suspensions, loss of form, really the champions are the team that finish at top of the table, having played their quota of matches. That should always be the case, and they should be the ones who win the Championship. And that became the rule, of course, once two-division football came in 1974. Previous to that, you had a top 4 playoff, when in fact a team who just suddenly hit form at the right moment could pinch the championship trophy in a couple of matches at the end of the long, hard season. The merit of winning your trophy, having played every match, has to be right. What we did retain over those early periods in the 80s was the principle of an end-of-season merit trophy. So the champions received the championship as truly the best team over the whole of the season. Then we had an end-of-season playoff, which became the double-header, of course, at Manchester United, where you have an opportunity to keep interest going to the end, the top 8 people playing for places, a merit trophy and a festival type of day out at the end of the season. But no way can the Premiership ever be compared with the Championship. And as a rugby league aficionado, I believe very strongly in fact that the finest trophy to win, and the one that really matters, is to put your hands on either side of the Championship trophy.
A new trophy was started in 1965, promoted and televised by BBC Two. The Floodlit Trophy became a very popular Tuesday night entertainment and gave a lot of clubs food for thought about floodlights.
Not coming off. But I was interrupted on the edition of that local paper that for 52 years since they beat Lancashire opponents in a cup tie. Neil Courtney's gone into the second row, and the absence of the 3 players you saw in the bench.
A wonderful piece of play by this.
When things started to get worse in the 1950s, the RFL looked at the game itself to find a way of recreating interest. In 1966, the limited tackle rule was brought in so that after the 4th tackle there would be a scrum. Kicking and drop goals were revived, but 4 tackles isn't a long time, and the excitement was easily lost when a team quickly offloaded the ball after a hurried attempt to attack. So in 1972, the number of tackles was set at 6. Another far-reaching change was introduced in 1964, the idea of subs, where a team could use 2 substitutes, but only for injured players. After 1965, these subs did not necessarily have to be for injury, and it was 1969 before a player could be substituted up to full time. Overall attendances never did regain the level of the 50s, in spite of all the attempts made by the league to repair the damage. The star teams didn't really have anything to worry about. A big clash between the likes of St Helens, Wigan, Wakefield, Leeds and later Salford was still enough to raise a decent crowd, especially when the venue was the breathtaking Wembley Stadium and the match the Challenge Cup final. Wigan, Wakefield and Leeds regularly made appearances at Wembley in the 1960s and from time to time met each other to give fans a nerve-tingling display of rugby league at its best. 94,672 turned out to see the arch-rivals St Helens and Wigan contest the 1961 final and were rewarded with a passionate battle. Wigan were back on form, fuelled by their Wembley wins in 58 and 59, and inspired by the class of McTeague, Boston, and their captain Eric Ashton. They gave it everything they had, but were simply outclassed by the Saints, who combined the remarkable talents of Alex Murphy and Tom van Vollenhoven in the backs, and Cliff Watson, Dick Huddart, and the formidable Vince Cornelius, the wild bull of the Pampas, in the forwards. At half-time, the Saints led 5-2, but 5 minutes into the second half, Fred Griffiths kicked a penalty and narrowed Saints' advantage to 1 point and reapplied the pressure. Saints could soon breathe easy, though, when Van Vollenhoven broke the Wigan defence. His length of the field try went down as one of the most memorable on record and marked 1/2 of a Saints double Wembley win over Wigan.
To go and beat Wigan at Wembley is probably one of the biggest occasions in anybody's playing career, and it was mine because Wigan had a very good side. You know, they also had some great players, people like Ashton and David Bolton, Boston. So it wasn't just an important match, it was also playing against great players.
The second half, the 1966 final, was Wigan's 6th appearance at Wembley in 10 years. Eric Ashton captained all 6, and Boston and McTeague played in them all. Saints hadn't been to Wembley as often, but there was no doubt that they were the stronger of the two teams once more. Their lineup was overwhelming. Murphy, Van Vollenhoven, Barrow, Killeen, Bishop and Mantle were enough to frighten any side and pack the crowds into the stadium. But the Saints had a tactical advantage over Wigan before the competition even started, as soon as they signed Wigan's hooker, Bill Sayer. Colin Clark got himself sent off before the final and was suspended from playing. Wigan lost their second hooker. St Helens realised that Sayer would always be the stronger at the scrum, so they created them by deliberately being caught offside, knowing full well that Sayer, the perfect hooker, would make sure that Saints dominated possession of the ball and outclass Wigan at Wembley for the second time.
And when we saw that there was no Clarkey, well, I mean, it was pennies from heaven, wasn't it? It was one of them things that 90% of the time you knew the way things were going to go, that we were going to have most of the ball. And at Wembley, if you have that, and I think we won out pretty 21-2. Straight after that, isn't it, it was another rule change. That if you run offside, you got the penalty, but you also got the throw-in as well. They changed the rules. It's like with the drop goals, they changed the rules. But, you know, rules are there to be broken. And if somebody can think a way around a rule, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's people reading the game and doing it the right way.
St Helens carried on their success into the 70s, and in 1976 had their highest point when they took the Challenge Cup from Widnes at Wembley 20 points to 5, and the Premiership from Salford at Swinton. In 1978 they had one of their lowest, when Leeds just wrestled the Challenge Cup trophy from their hands. Wigan had only managed to win one of their 4 Challenge Cup finals in the 60s, in 1965 when they met Hunslet in one of the most talked about finals in the history of the competition. Hunslet nearly became the giant beaters to end them all. 20 minutes before the final whistle was blown, they were within 4 points of Wigan, who eventually lifted the trophy. It wasn't only the sparkling contest that made the final unforgettable. For the first time ever, 2 players, one from each side, shared the Lance Todd trophy. Brian Gavitas from Hunslet and Ray Ashby from Wigan.
Now I want to ask you two the same question I asked the other players. Who would you, Ray, nominate for the Lance Todd Memorial Trophy as the outstanding player?
I should give them all one, David. Give them all one.
What about you, Brian?
Well, if I had to choose one, probably Laurie Gilfeder has scored so many points.
Yeah. Well, I've got a surprise for you both, in fact, because I've just heard that you two have won it and share it.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you, Brian. Congratulations.
Great stuff. Well done. We hear the voting's absolutely equal, and you two share the Memorial Trophy. Thank you very much.
In the late 60s, Leeds had dominated the league, and in 1968 just stole the Challenge Cup away from the sophisticated Wakefield Trinity in a final most remembered for 2 things: the extraordinary weather conditions which earned it the name the Water Splash Final, and the unfortunate but notorious missed goal kick in the dying seconds of the game. It was a sad end to Wakefield's 4 Wembley appearances in that decade, because the other 3 had all ended in convincing victories. When the 70s approached, a new star side appeared and threatened to knock all the champion teams from their pedestals. From a spectator point of view, Salford were definitely a first-class side. Although their only major wins were the championships of 74 and 76, their team of all-stars were fantastic to watch. David Watkins was probably their greatest crowd puller, especially when he was in good kicking form. It was never better than in 1972-73, when he set a new goal-kicking record by booting over 221 goals. From a cup point of view, Widnes were the unrivaled stars. The John Player Trophy was theirs in 75-76, 78-79, and in 77-78 they held the title of champions, and in 78-79 they took the Floodlit Trophy. Towards the end of the 70s, Widnes practically made the Lancashire Cup their own. Their trophy trail led them to Wembley 4 times, and in 1975 and in 1979 they added the Challenge Cup to their collection. Challenge Cup ties have always generated a lot of interest, even from people outside the game. Club loyalties and local rivalries get stronger, but as the final approaches and fewer teams are involved, more and more people focus their attention on the rank outsider, the potential giant killer. In 1967, 2 clubs caught the imagination by fighting their way through the top teams right the way through to the final. In a hotly contested battle, Featherstone, who were 20th, beat Barrow, who were 15th in the league, 17 points to 12. Featherstone's success didn't end there, because in 1973 they were back at Wembley, pitting their wits against Bradford Northern. The year after, they were at Wembley again, this time their opponents Warrington, inspired by their player coach Alex Murphy. They were too much. At the end of the battle, Warrington won 24-9 and gave Murphy a repeat of his Wembley victory with Lee in 1971. At the end of the 60s, another modest Yorkshire side started to gain strength, and a new competition gave them the perfect opportunity to prove themselves. By the time they had taken their 3rd consecutive floodlit trophy, Castleford were beginning to get themselves noticed. When they beat Salford and then Wigan to take 2 Challenge Cup trophies in a row, they became real stars. On the international scene, Great Britain started well in the early 60s, but seemed to go slowly but steadily downhill. However, in 1961 and 1965, when 2 Kiwi touring teams visited Great Britain, both surrendered the series. In 1962, Eric Ashton led his Lions to victory in the first test at Sydney, 31-12. But it was in the second test, in Brisbane, that the Ashes were won. The third test was one of only 3 games lost, but in New Zealand, the Lions lost 3 games out of 9, including both the tests. On the 1966 tour, the Lions turned their 1962 results around, and they won the test in New Zealand, but handed the Ashes over in Australia. The 1967 Australian tour was led by one of the finest Australian centres ever to set foot on British soil, Reg Gasnier. The Kangaroos didn't win the series as easily as they had in 1963, but still, worries about Great Britain's international standing began to circulate. The 1970s Lions, led by Frank Myler, temporarily restored confidence in Britain's international game. They lost the first, but the side was rejuvenated in the second and third at Sydney. In 1971, a Kiwi touring team came to England and plunged Great Britain further into the doldrums by winning 2 tests to 1. Britain had a short spell of success when they carried the World Cup home from France in 1972, but for the next 10 years they had to be happy with 1 or 2 near victories. When they went to Australia in 1979, they suffered one of their worst ever Ashes defeats. The Kangaroos won every test, and in the first one kept the Lions from scoring a single point. The worries that had started earlier in the decade about Great Britain's ability on the international field began to get stronger. On the home front, the game saw many dramatic changes, most as a result of the Rugby League's meeting with market forces. On entering a new decade, they had, as always, on their mind expansion. And when soccer clubs started offering ground sharing as a means of spreading costs, the Rugby League saw the advantages as well. Not only of spreading the costs, but of spreading the good news and taking their sport outside the Rugby League stronghold. Their missionary work was well rewarded, because the first joint venture brought the realisation of a long-held dream, a Rugby League club in the capital of England. In 1980, Fulham Rugby League began sharing Fulham FC's Craven Cottage ground. It was the start of a campaign to establish Rugby League in London. In their opening game, Fulham played a relegated Wigan side and won in a stirring match in front of 10,000 awestruck spectators. It seemed like Rugby League and London were destined for a great future together. But without the support of a reserve team, and with players who trained in the north, travelling down to London just for match days, the club couldn't sustain their first division place and were immediately relegated at the end of the season. Without the necessary further investment, a great chance to establish a first-class team in London was lost. After struggling on for 4 years, in the 1993-94 season, the now London Crusaders became the London Broncos, and are now more or less guaranteed a place in the 1996 Super League. It seems like London and Rugby League could be destined for a great future after all. Fulham's success in the early 80s seemed to inspire other new clubs to spring up here, there and everywhere, most of them attached to football stadia. Cardiff City, Mansfield Marksmen and Sheffield Eagles all followed suit. Sheffield Eagles have been by far the most successful of the 80s recruits. In their first match against Rochdale Hornets in September 1984, a 29-10 win was a positive omen for the future. Since 1984, they've won 2 Second Division Premiership finals, 1 Second Division Championship, and have taken part in a Yorkshire Cup final. The important difference between Sheffield and some of the other clubs founded in the 80s is that Sheffield have built up a rich system of support teams where players can be developed. They have strong academy and alliance teams now that have reared players for the academy, under-21s and senior Great Britain international sides. The Alliance League for reserve teams only introduced itself in 1984. 11 years on, in 1995, the Alliance League has 2 divisions and an Alliance Challenge Cup. The Academy League is an even more recent initiative, but in 4 years has become firmly established as a testing ground for young hopefuls. When 3 divisions were established in 1991, the best players were drawn towards the top First Division clubs. So were the spectators, so were the sponsors, and so were the TV contracts. In the Second Division, all these changes had a depressing effect. As all eyes and cameras were turned towards the First Division, Second Division clubs struggled, and financial problems became more common. The problem for the clubs was made worse when a players' association was formed and freedom of contract was introduced. Players started demanding bigger wages and top clubs paid them. In 1991, Ellery Hanley became the first $250,000 transfer from Wigan to Leeds. And in 1992, Wigan shocked Rugby League folk when they paid a world record fee of £440,000 to witness for Martin O'Fire. Second Division and some lower First Division clubs struggled. Today, financial worries are the norm for clubs in both divisions and have even caused some to go back to ground sharing. In 1992-93, Swinton played this, their last game, on their own ground at the famous Station Road. As the 80s progressed, the organisation of rugby league became more and more chaotic. Old competitions were finished, new ones replaced them, and some stayed the same. New rules were introduced, which dramatically changed the way the game itself was played. The sin bin gave referees a way of penalising an offending player without sending him off. The number of points for a try was increased to 4, and the turnover at the 6th tackle was created. In 1982, the County Championship, a competition as old as the league itself, was abandoned after 87 years. In 1985, the War of the Roses match was introduced, and in 1991, they disappeared. So did a long tradition of cross-Pennine rivalry and passionate confrontations. In 1992, the league came under the hand of a new chief executive when a long-serving David Oxley retired. Maurice Lindsay left Central Park to move to the Rugby League headquarters and take up the post. Unfortunately, 80s change was restricted to the domestic front. On the international field, nothing changed. Any hope of a British revival was smashed when France beat England 5 points to 1 at Headingley in 1981 to take the European Championship. The two countries met again in July 1982 in Venice. On a very public stage, in a match intended to promote the game, Great Britain were beaten by the French 7-8. The writing was on the wall for the Lions when Max Krilich brought his Kangaroos touring party to England to contest the 1982 Ashes. The 1982 Kangaroos were the most exciting, entertaining, skillful and successful international side ever to grace a rugby field. Their ranks were bursting with individual genius, names that are still ingrained in the hearts and minds of all those who were privileged enough to watch them play. Max Krilich, the team's skipper, was a master of the sharp, evasive run and intricate move. Wayne Pearce, the youngest man on the tour, tantalised the assembled masses with a strength, speed and power that could take him through almost any defensive line. Ray Price thrilled the crowds with his energetic and untiring defence, and Eric Groth astounded them with an unnerving speed for a man of his size. To do justice to the Australians, all 15 players were remarkable, and it seems unfair to set any one player apart from the other. But 3 of them were going to have a long-lasting effect on British Rugby League. The first, Brett Kenny, was just short of 6 foot tall. He weighed 13 stones and had a wiry but strong physique. When he played, he made himself one of the most noticeable players on the park. In 1984-85, he came back to England to play for Wigan. The second is a supremely talented centre who would probably have looked more at home in the forwards than in the backs, Mal Meninga. The third is possibly the most complete standoff of all time. When Wally Lewis was in possession of the ball, something exciting was bound to happen, and time would stand still while the great Australian decided which skill to call upon. The whole tour was a whitewash, and for the first time ever, the Kangaroos went home undefeated, and duly became known as the Invincibles. In the tests, Great Britain never really stood a chance. On the 30th of October at Boothferry Park, Hull, the series was started. For Great Britain, it was the beginning of the end. In the second test at Central Park, 10 players had been dropped from the Lions' side. The changes were incidental, and the Kangaroos still ran rings round the Lions. The Ashes were already lost when the third test was staged at Headingley. The Kangaroos' performance, as individuals and as a team, easily put the Lions in the shade. But it's unfair to disregard a Lions team that included a lot of respected English players. George Fairbairn, Brian Noble, John Woods, and Lee Crooks and Andy Gregory made their international debuts. In 1985, Mark Graham brought another Kiwi tour and met a British side desperate to recover some of their national pride. The series was drawn and hopes were raised for England's chance of international success in the 1986 series. Wally Lewis's team was every bit as talented as Max Krilich's 1982 Kangaroos. The Invincibles had returned. Their captain, Wally Lewis, led his team to victory in every single match. The only team to come anywhere near to beating them was Oldham, who took the Aussies to within 6 points.
Makes a good bust. He's looking for support. He does get the pass away to Ashton, the halfback. Ashton's taken down. It's gone away there to Warneggy. Warneggy back on the inside, and it's to Colin Hawkyard, and that's a splendid try. A splendid try to the Oldham side, backing up the ball carrier. They'll do it every time. And again, Flanagan, the maestro at dummy half, gets a pass away to Ashton. Topless throws the dummy, tries to straighten. Got a forward pass into Raper. Raper's on the sprint. There's a little kick being put through. It's a chase. This could be another try to Oldham. It is. And Raper responsible for it with a very nice little grubber kick put through there out wide. 22 points to 16. Probably never really in danger of losing the game.
In 1988, Ellery Hanley led the Lions to Australia and an unexpected victory in the third test. It wasn't the series, but it was the first time in 10 years that Britain had beaten Australia.
Henderson Gill, and it's a try. Well, it's worked again. Look at this. Henderson Gill's gone absolutely mad. Absolutely mad. Slapping hands, saying, what about that? This is Lachlan. Lachlan winds up. Lachlan straight through. Australia still going. Lachlan. And he's got support too. Unloads it. Oh, look at this. Henderson Gill winding up. It's a chase. Gary Jack comes with him, but that's a great try. Oh, great Brendan in, and he does a bit of a boogie. And the Union Jack flags here have gone absolutely crazy. Well, what a try. Andy Gregory makes another three. Oh, still going. Andy Gregory's got Mike Gregory with him. Here's another try coming up in the League Cup. Gregory hasn't got the legs. Down he goes. He'll get there. Mike Gregory has done it for Great Britain under the post. Oh boy. Andy Gregory opened him up and Mike Gregory went on with it. The English flags will fly here now. Malcolm, really, what a great moment for him. And look at the Union Jack flying high. Strong emotion here at the Sydney Football Stadium. They've waited a long time. Now this is a great moment for Rugby League internationally, believe you me.
At club level, Great Britain did manage to make their mark on the international map and revive some faith and hope in British Rugby League. For the first time in 1987, Wigan and Manly Warringah met at Central Park to contest the World Club Challenge. A battle of the two premier clubs from England and Australia. 36,895 fans turned out to watch Wigan beat Manly in a nerve-tingling rugby league display.
World Club Championship match. Well, a long way to come. 12,000 miles for the Manly side. 41 minutes. 6 more to go, says the referee. That's it. It's all over. Wigan are the World Club Champions with a thoroughly deserved victory by 8 points to 2.
Widnes followed suit in the second World Club Challenge, beating Canberra 30 points to 18. I was in Australia and watched it through the night. It was great to be an Englishman the following morning.
Again, Widnes. Grimmer. Beautiful ball from McKenzie. Off he has got a try. He'll love this. But what a ball from Grimmer to McKenzie. 2 metres away. Now, Courier gets the ball out. Jonathan Davis was hit high. Somebody could be sent off. A swinging tackle from Canberra. 10 minutes in the sin bin. The disappointment shows for Daly. In fact, has been awarded the try. So Widnes playing with tremendous confidence. Oh, look at the confidence showing now as Wright links up with Offia. And the England's going to score Offia. They won't get near him. And away he goes. His little dance for the crowd. The Widnes bench comes alive. The one-hander pass picked up by Matthew Wood. try for Daly, who will score. Did he control the ball? No, he lost it. Nothing is going right. All he had to do was control the ball, and it was a try. Daly runs back into the position as witness. Have a quick restart. Dowd is clear. He's got a ton of support. Wright's inside him. Wright will score under the post. Canberra were caught napping at the other end. That will be the World Club Challenge.
The championship trophy being presented to Kurt Sorensen, captain of the Widnes side. Listen to the cheer.
In 1991, Wigan returned to the world stage and beat Penrith 21 points to 4. In 1994, in the first ever World Club Championship played in Australia, Wigan beat the Brisbane Broncos on Brisbane's own territory. At home, the 1980s club scene opened with the appearance of two rugby league giants who stood side by side, only a stone's throw apart within the boundaries of one city. Hull and Hull KR met in so many competition finals in the early 80s, it seemed as if they had a divine right to battle out bitter rivalries on a national stage. The clash that most captured the hearts and minds of the rugby league world and totally divided the city of Hull was the 1980 Challenge Cup final. Widnes continued to be successful in the 1980s. In 1981 they beat Hull KR to take the Challenge Cup, and in 1984 they were back for a convincing 19-6 win against Wigan. St Helens, as always, proved strong contenders in the 80s competition, especially when they had a chance to assert their supremacy over deadly rivals Wigan in the 1984 Lancashire Cup final. They didn't only beat Wigan, they did it at Central Park, in front of a dejected throng of Wigan followers. In 1985-86, the mighty Alex Murphy took up residence at Knowsley Road, and it wasn't long before Saints appeared at Wembley, in 1987, and again in 1989, and in the Premiership final of 1988. Halifax and Leeds have always offered similar challenges. More recently, Leeds have produced some awesome rugby league, and tested the skill of some of the other top clubs.
Oh, it's a very, very special day. Well, for myself personally, it's the first time I've beaten Wigan since I've left Wigan Central Park, but, you know, make no mistake about it, they're still a champion side. I mean, we were up by something like 10 points, so they came back at us and went in front again, but it must have been a good advert for the game completely for rugby league, and it's probably done no harm for the game rugby league. Somebody had to beat Wigan, and I'm glad that it was us, but as I said, you know, taking nothing away from Wigan, they're a champion side still.
The greatest team of the 1980s and the 90s has to be Wigan. And love 'em or hate 'em, any true rugby league supporter in Wigan or any other rugby league camp must acknowledge their achievements. In 1985, the wheels of the mighty Wigan machine were set in motion with a Challenge Cup win over Hull. Brett Kenny, guesting for Wigan, controlled the backs perfectly, and the tries came rolling in. Since then, Wigan have won 9 Challenge Cup trophies, 7 championships, 4 premierships, 5 Lancashire Cups, 3 John Player trophies, 3 Regal trophies, 3 Charity Shields, 3 World Club Championships and 1 Nissan World Sevens competition. An honours list envied and respected by every other club in the league. And in 1995, they were acclaimed as Team of the Year by BBC TV. Wigan, like a lot of others, benefited from their exposure to some fantastic overseas players, who not only came to England as opposition, but as coaches and teammates as well. No one will ever forget the part played by Brett Kenny, Graham Lowe, John Money and Graham West in making Wigan what it is today. In 1983, when the international ban on signing players was lifted, clubs began to import giants who had opposed Great Britain on the international field. Some of their sparkle rubbed off, and the standards of play and fitness and skill of British players improved beyond all recognition, so much so that it's virtually impossible to pick out 2 great names of the 90s. But Jonathan Davis and Martin O'Fire spring to mind. One player has stood head and shoulders over all others. A player who can play in the forwards or in the backs and combines all the skills needed to be the ultimate in rugby league players. Ellery Hanley is the complete all-round professional. With the standards at the top clubs improving constantly, more and more outstanding players are being produced. Francis Cummings, Andrew Fannell, Carl Hammond, Nathan McAvoy, Steve Prescott, Chris Radlinski, Ryan Sheridan and Iestyn Harris, undoubtedly the greats of the future. I wonder what those old rugby rebels of 1895 would make of their game now. A woman president, summer rugby, a Super League. They can rest easy. It's a game that demands skill, athleticism, valour, and most of all, dignity. It's got a great future.